thanks for sticking with us and going over in our last one. I appreciate the patience. I'd like to mention as well, all CEUs, go to the front, ask Stephanie Porter, she's walking around. We'll have the QR code up at the end of this presentation. Any CEU questions, that if you missed anything, just come up and ask us about it. So I'm pleased to introduce this afternoon's speaker, Megan Miller, the Agronomy Programs Manager for the Illinois Soybean Association. Megan works on behalf of the Illinois soybean farmers in the development and management of conservation outreach efforts at the Illinois Soybean Association. She supports partner conservation programs such as precision conservation management and the Soil Water Outcomes Fund, and manages the grant and partnership strategy for the ISA Agronomy Team. Additionally, Megan serves as a carbon market and farmer conservation program expert for ISA. Please join me in welcoming Megan.
Thank you so much, Abigail, and thanks for sticking around this afternoon. And I do want to put a plug in to please attend the poster session at the end of the day. The students are really excited to be able to talk to the CCAs and farmers in the audience. As Abigail said, I'm the Agronomic Programs Manager at the Illinois Soybean Association, and one of the things I work on pretty frequently is carbon markets, conservation funding, and working with our conservation partners. So these are just a few of the topics we're going to be going over today. Feel free to stop me at any time and ask some questions. I'm going to try to cut a lot of the jargon out of this, but this is a new space, so feel free to ask as things pop up. So the first question I'm often asked when talking about carbon dioxide is, why are we focused on this now? Well, many companies and countries have committed to carbon neutrality and carbon negativity within the next decades. So carbon neutrality means from a point in time forward, we won't emit any more carbon. Carbon negativity, Microsoft has such a goal. They want to reduce all of the carbon emissions that they have ever produced. And so that's going to take a variety of tools. So carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas along with nitrous oxide, methane, and other fluorinated gases. And why are we so worried about carbon? Well, in 2022, we had $18 billion weather and climate disasters. So when we first started talking about global warming, we were talking about the temperature rising, but really what we're finding is this really means erratic weather, and erratic weather is very expensive. And that is why governments and companies are committing to trying to reduce their carbon. Really, they're trying to reduce their insurance bills a lot of times. So in response to this, the United States government has released what they're calling climate smart practices for farmers. And in order to address climate change through agriculture, they have announced around $23 billion in funding for climate smart agriculture through two different tranches of funding, one through the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities, which I'll get into later today, and then another through the Inflation Reduction Act, which is estimated to be about $19 billion over 10 years. And these are practices that like cover cropping, nutrient management, reduced tillage, and increased biodiversity. These are also things that are going to help the principles of soil health. So the goal is this is not just beneficial for the environment, it's also beneficial for your farm. So no-till and cover cropping are two of the most common practices for enrollment in a carbon market or in a conservation program. Your crops are tools, and your cover crops are tools that put carbon dioxide in the ground, and your soil is responsible for keeping that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So you grow your cash crop all summer long, you put your cover crop in the fall, and that allows the soil to continually pull CO2 from the atmosphere, and then not tilling your soil, strip tilling or minimal disturbance keeps that carbon dioxide from leaving as a gas. Now, American Farmland Trust and the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership have done some work estimating the amount of carbon different practices can sequester in Illinois specifically. So if you add cover cropping and no-till to your operation, you're looking at adding about 1.5 tons of carbon dioxide per acre. Now, when I show this slide, the question I get a lot is, well, I grow a crop, it photosynthesizes, aren't I already putting carbon into my soil? And the answer is yes, you are, just not enough to make a sale off of it. So we have played with one of the more prominent carbon models called the Comet model in a 79-acre field in central Illinois with multiple tillage passes. Across the whole 79 acres, sequestered 5 tons of CO2 or about 0.6 tons per acre. So price of carbon's averaging $15, $20 an acre. There's not enough meat on the bone to sell that if you're just looking at your cash crop. That's why we're looking at cover cropping and no-till as well as other practices to help with this. So one question we also hear a lot is, why can't I participate if I have been cover cropping or no-tilling for a long time? And this is based on a principle called additionality, which essentially says that carbon would not have been sequestered without the money from the market. And this is a carbon market principle for agriculture, mining, all sorts of other things, and agriculture is just figuring out how to deal with it. That being said, you can typically still make a small change and be able to enroll in a market. Don't count yourself out if you've been planting cereal rye for a long time. Look at diversifying your cover crop mixture. If you're going to strip till and you think you can go to no-till, that can get you into a market. So while this is, a problem, this is something you can overcome. So there are some common practices for market enrollment, including basically adjusting the 4 R's with fertilizer, also planting different cover crops, adding a perennial crop, or adding another crop to your rotation. You can't get paid for planting wheat in a cover crop program, but that still does have a lot of the same benefits and you get to sell it in the end. You can also, adjust your tillage and add things to your rotation. And these are going to give you benefits for your soil and for your soil health. Cover crops and reduced tillage are known to help with soil temperature and moisture regulation. They can reduce soil loss from wind and water. They can also help with winter and early season weed suppression. I know there are definitely some long-term cover croppers that have been able to eliminate an herbicide pass because of that cover crop. It's going to improve your soil structure, which is going to increase the soil's ability to retain water or lose water quickly when needed. It also will increase the diversity of soil biological communities and keep those nutrients in the ground. I was just moderating KJ Johnson's session. Fertilizer prices are still pretty high. And so as a farmer, you really have a vested interest in keeping that fertilizer in your ground. So how do carbon markets work and who's in the value chain? So as a farmer, you are actually a credit generator or a carbon dioxide sink. And basically you plant a cover crop, you reduce your tillage, and that prevents, that sucks carbon out of the atmosphere. You provide data to a carbon aggregator. This is somebody like Soil Water Outcomes Fund, Indigo, Corteva has a program, and they manage that program. And then they provide that data to the credit buyer, which is somebody like Microsoft or PepsiCo, and then money starts flowing back to you. So after the aggregator has verified that you have implemented your conservation practice, the money will flow from the buyer to the aggregator and then the aggregator back to you. And different programs have different payment rates and schedules, so that's something I would encourage you to check out. The Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership has an awesome tool on there that shows you as much information as they were able to find about the carbon markets that were available. So why are these so focused on data? A lot of these programs that are, especially are nationwide, are not able actually to go out to every field and sample them. And so we're very reliant on models in order to estimate the amount of carbon we've captured into the soil. And that is why you need to provide the data to them. We have a carbon data guidebook up in the foyer area outside of the main room, and you can also access it on illsoyadvisor.com. And this will show you the typical amount of data that's required for enrollment in a carbon market. We interviewed most of the top markets and kind of aggregated all the information, put that in a book for you. So it'll show you pretty much every type of data you will need and also give you some tips and tricks for managing your data. Really, the first step in enrolling in these markets is managing your data. So when it comes to markets, there's actually two types of carbon markets. There's inset programs and offset programs. Offset programs are when credits are utilized to offset emissions outside of a value chain. You as a farmer enroll in a program like Indigo. You implement your conservation practice. They verify that your conservation practice has happened, and they sell that credit to somebody like Delta or Microsoft. That's called offsetting and is outside the agricultural value chain. There's a big chunk of this talk coming up that's going to focus on insetting, and this tends to be a bit more agriculturally friendly. Insetting credits are used to reduce emissions within a value chain. So for example, Soil and Water Outcomes Fund has PepsiCo as a buyer. So everyone in here has had Pepsi. It's got a lot of corn syrup in it. You brew that corn syrup and there was carbon emissions associated with that. There are carbon emissions associated with row crop agriculture. So an insetting program reduces the emissions kind of associated with a certain product, and it stays within the value chain, while offsetting is, again, selling outside of the value chain. So this graph shows just how much, based from 1990 to 2019, emissions come from agriculture. And as you can see, we are emitters of carbon dioxide, and that is why insetting programs are able to work. People are looking to reduce the carbon intensity of their Doritos, their Pepsi, and other tasty snacks. And that's what we, as row crops, the Soybean Association, corn, have to remember is row crops are ingredients sold by small businesses to publicly traded companies. The SEC is looking at this. All of these companies are making claims about how green they are, how sustainable they are, and the SEC wants to make sure there's not a lot of greenwashing happening. And so there's a proposed SEC ruling right now that requires publicly traded companies to report on their carbon emissions. When this first came out, it was a bit stressful. We were worried about what the data burden was going to be for farmers, and the companies were also worried about how they were going to be able to collect that data. There has been an uptick in insetting programs since this was announced, but I don't think the data burden has shifted as much as we were all expecting it was going to. So this is a busy slide, and I'm going to take some time to break it down, but there are 3 insetting programs that are, well, there are multiple insetting programs available in Illinois, but I wanted to highlight these 3, and all 3 of these people are in the room right now. So the first program I wanted to highlight is the Illinois Cover Crop Initiative. This is running through American Farmland Trust. This is a practice-based initiative where you receive $10 per acre for cover crops, and it's available for statewide. So you make that practice change as a farmer, you sequester that carbon, and ADM claims that as an insetting credit. So Chris Reynolds and Jean are in the room and would be happy to talk to you about that if you're interested in enrolling. The Precision Conservation Management Program also has an insetting program with PepsiCo. There are a variety of practices available, and there are a variety of payments available for new and old practices. This is located in certain PCM regions because PepsiCo has a draw area. They're sourcing their grain from certain elevators, and they will be, and they want to just ensure that there is less carbon intensity in that value chain. And finally, a third program I'd like to highlight is the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund. They're also an ecosystem service market, which we'll define a bit more in a second. This is an outcome-based program, so you get paid for pounds of P and N that you prevent from running off. So there's the water quality credit, and you also get credit funding for tons of carbon sequestered. And with that, the average payment is about $30 per acre, but they are currently only launched in the northern part of Illinois. And again, this is because of the PepsiCo draw area. So I mentioned the word ecosystem service market, and as a team, we're very focused on the nutrient loss reduction strategy. And so we're happy to see the presence of markets like this today. So basically, an ecosystem service market uses the same practice to address multiple areas of pollution. This currently is carbon and water quality, but there's rumblings of adding biodiversity and some different things off there. And stacking these payments often leads to higher payments for a farmer. So for the funding for these can be a bit trickier, and as a grower or CCA, if you're advising people, you should kind of pay attention to that. So for carbon, it's companies looking for either offsets or insets. And then for the water quality, it's often governmental agencies funding that, whether it's municipalities wanting to offset their emissions from water treatment plants through agriculture, or even national grants from the USDA. Especially when enrolling in an ecosystem service market, pay attention to who is funding that water quality piece, because you can't be doubly enrolled in federal programs. So a lot of these same practices that we showed earlier for carbon markets are also available for ecosystem service markets, and they also match up with a lot of the recommended in-field strategies for achieving our NLRS goals, our nutrient loss reduction strategy goals. So we get the added bonus of enhanced water quality while we're also sequestering carbon. So this is an example of a way to start comparing carbon markets on your own. And some things to look for to start understanding differences in pricing, contract length, and other things. So these are just some examples of the different things we've talked about. Indigo is a carbon offset market. I think they're priced around $15 per acre right now, and they have a 5-year contract. They are an offset market that is federally registered with a carbon registry, and they require longer contracts. The payment terms are listed above, and that is to reduce the risk of the aggregator. Most of the payment terms are actually reducing the risk of the aggregator. They all have customers, and they have to ensure that they don't oversell carbon, and they also understand that things happen in your field. Sometimes you can't get a cover crop in, and so this reduces the risk for them. For Bayer has a carbon inset program that is $3 an acre for no-till, $6 an acre for cover cropping, 9-year combined. It's an inset market, and we typically see inset markets currently having shorter 1-year contracts. And they again have different payment terms, again, to reduce their risk, and they're using that to inset or their own carbon emissions. And finally, Soil and Water Outcomes Fund is an ecosystem service carbon inset market with federal funding for runoff prevention. They have a 1-year contract, pretty farmer friendly, and because of how they are funded, they are able to provide 50% of the funding at enrollment and 50% post-practice verification. So there are a few things to keep in mind if you're wanting to prepare for market enrollment. The first being, understand your conservation goals. If you're to the point where you're looking for funding for this, we hope that you have a conservation goal on your farm, whether that's reducing erosion, working with moisture retention, or anything like that. Start with your conservation goal. None of this funding matters if you're not focused on the conservation. Another tip we typically give out is it's probably too early to enroll the whole farm. A lot of these programs are pretty new. They're either in their pilot or the first year out of their pilot. They're figuring out what's going on. You're implementing practices for the first time. Start small and big up. They will all be happy to work with you for that. Be prepared with good conservation agronomy. Find a good conservation agronomist to help you transition. We've talked about a lot of different people today, but American Farmland Trust has a conservation agronomist. PCM has conservation agronomists. Soil and Water Outcomes Fund has conservation agronomists. Our staff has conservation agronomists, and the IDOA has just hired 40 conservation agronomists. Rely on these people. They want to help you. They want to help you transition. And finally, get your data ready. Records and data are the key to receiving the highest dollar for your work. And as I mentioned before, we do have a carbon data guidebook that will help you walk through that. And remember, there's a lot of custom application that goes on in Illinois. You're going to need to get some data likely from your custom applicator. Share this guidebook with them so they can help you be prepared for enrollment. Some things to pay attention to. with enrolling is contract length versus land rental agreements. Will you be farming that field for the length of your contract? A lot of these multi-year contracts, you do have to get permission from your landowner, so just pay attention to that. Are you enrolling in an inset versus an offset market? Also, have you read the fine print on the contract? If you are in a 5-year contract and you have plans to do something like add a tile line to your field, you have just dug a hole and emitted a ton of carbon and have voided some of your carbon contracts. Pay attention to how these different markets will use your data. Some of these markets are housed within the same companies that sell you inputs, right? They're housed within Corteva. They're housed within Bayer. Understand how they're using that data and make sure they're not using it to market a chemical back to you. And pay attention to how these different markets are verifying that your practice was implemented. Different markets do receipt audits, field visits. They all do modeling, and some of them even do satellite. So I would expect a visit to your field at some point to make sure your cover crop was planted. Also pay attention to program exclusion. By enrolling in one market or one program, does that prevent you from being able to enroll in another? As I said earlier, you can't get federal funding twice for the same practice on the same acre. This, I'm going to get into this a bit more, but this is going to become especially tricky as the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities start rolling out. There are a lot of private-public partnerships in there, which is awesome collaboration, but that also potentially reduces your ability to enroll in multiple programs. And finally, a lot of programs that were historically cost share programs are now associated with a carbon asset. These are often inset programs, which is why I kind of hit on that so hard, but that also prevents you from selling your carbon. Again, you can't sell a carbon credit twice. And so one more thing for you to pay attention to. So I want to take a pause right here. And first of all, talk about, we do have a carbon sense part of our Illinois Advisor website. This has everything I talked about today, plus more. It's got some really cool infographics to understand the market mechanics, and some members of our team did a great job putting some transition advice up there. It's got FAQs and a glossary. But I'm going to start talking about some different types of funding for conservation, and I want to take a pause and see if anybody has any carbon market specific questions. Yeah.
To clarify, you were talking about how programs you are already doing certain conservation tactics, no-till, planting, they would not accept that in carbon credit. Is that specific to offset programs? Is that specific to certain types of carbon credit programs, or is that in general?
All of the above. But what I want to encourage you with that is there's typically a small change you can still make. So I know in your case, there's a lot of cereal rye that goes on your farm. You diversify that cover crop, make sure you're going to be able to enroll. But different markets have different requirements. And, you know, I highlighted some programs that were available in Illinois, but if you want to enroll, contact that rep and read the fine print of what you're getting involved with.
Question.
Yeah.
So what's the mechanism being used to determine the value of the ton of carbon on the region?
Can you repeat the question?
Yep. What is the mechanism being used to determine the value of a ton of carbon? This is a great question, and this is something the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership and a lot of the commodity groups and different agricultural partners in the room spend a lot of time partnering. I don't have a good answer for that other than they're trying to spend the least amount of money that they can spend and still get you to enroll. There is some work going on in ISAP to try to identify how much different practices cost, so we can produce hey, this is the minimum floor that it takes to put in a cover crop, that it takes to switch to conservation tillage. But you know, this is a lot of times corporate America, and so they are, you know, they're driving the price down to reduce how much they have to spend on it.
You met with Pepsi, right, Megan?
Yep.
Did they get into any pricing type information?
So we were very fortunate to have the CEO of PepsiCo visit both the Precision Conservation Management Program in Nebraska and the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund with us in Illinois. They didn't really get into pricing. That being said, PepsiCo has partnered on a lot of these partnerships for climate smart commodities grants and are, trying to match their dollars with federal dollars as well.
Yeah, help me understand. Plant winter weekend, 1st of October, you let it die. You don't use any chemicals to kill it and plant no-till soybeans in that wheat stubble. They're growing until October. Looks like that would be something that anybody would want the worst, those kind of acres, and yet wheat's not considered a cover crop.
So wheat is not considered a cover crop because you sell it. That being said, there are programs that will let you enroll with crop diversity. That doesn't count you out. It's just not going to it's not the same code with the USDA NRCS. And that's kind of what dictates a lot of this, but wheat has been shown to really help with water quality and also is doing the same carbon sequestration function. So, still chat with people and see how that works. I know when we're in conversations with different markets, we often ask about wheat. I used to work for a small grains program and it's secretly my favorite crop. Abigail, you didn't hear that. So plant wheat. Joe.
We do allow wheat. We don't say the cover crop has to be a cover crop. We encourage it to be used for other means of revenue as well. Making sure the farm is profitable is #1 priority. Another thing on the pricing, so like why insetting is so important as well. Because the commodity we're raising is a part of the supply chain. Insetting had the carbon accounting laws around insetting allows for multiple, as long as they're at different levels, different stages of the supply chain, they can all share the cost of that credit, but still claim ownership of it. So against their greenhouse gas accounting reduction, which means ultimately at the end of the day, it raises more dollars to the farmer because it's raising the value of that credit.
So they're not splitting it. They're going to.
So say instead of one company paying $20 a ton, you get 3 companies who pay $15 a ton. So each individual company is less, but it's part of being part of the supply chain because the footprint of that commodity goes to the processor, which is the footprint of the PepsiCo, which is the footprint of the target. So they're all connected. But that's why insetting is very, very important when it comes to agriculture.
So you get paid 3 times for the same credit.
It doesn't look like that on your end as a farmer. That's more, Joe works for Soil and Water Outcomes Fund. They have to manage all this, push the credits through their credit creation machine and then push them out to you as money and back to the buyers as carbon credits. So, but insetting can help increase the price.
So Megan, right now, the price that's being paid to farmers, the only one that might even entice you to adopt the practice would be the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund payment, because it costs so much to do these, put these cover crops in, that we're still losing money unless you're doing it for other reasons. Okay, so I know most farmers that farm very large acreage at all are not going to want to make this change for this little money. So is the money ever going to get better, or are we going to be told that the marketplace is going to say your soybeans have to be grown using these practices, or we're not going to pay you this much, we're going to have a different payment?
I am afraid the market is going to end up driving a lot of that. The Illinois Soybean Association did take some board members out to understand conservation around the Chesapeake Bay. They are getting close to $100 an acre and are still at only about 50% cover crop adoption. That's a huge increase compared to Illinois, but that's still not, I think, the level that a lot of these companies are looking for. I would recommend starting small and trying to do it while it was voluntary. I'm not trying to scare everyone into regulations, but you have the opportunity to play with this now with a lot of freedom. Rely on the conservation agronomists. You don't even have to enroll in a program in order to play with some of this. So, you know, just, I would do it while you can decide to do it. Yes.
What about pennycress? That's a brand new ground cover, but they want to make it marketable, to sell it, you know, to harvest it. Is that they're gonna classify that a cover crop? Okay, that's eventually gonna be a cash crop if they can find the market for it or the place to process it. Will that be a hindrance, or will it be an asset to move forward to wheat and some of the other products that you can harvest?
Yeah, pennycress is very similar to wheat in that aspect. There's still a lot of work going on right now to be able to do that. Again, it might not count as a cover crop by USDA standards, but it's still increasing crop diversity on that ground. And there are, you know, that does increase your carbon sequestration in the soil. So a lot of markets will count that. And that?
Is there any talk of like scaling the payments for cover crop depending on when that's terminated or how much biomass accumulated? Because like, I mean, like a small cereal rye is a couple inches tall versus if you like it's 2 foot tall, there's probably a pretty big difference in actual carbon there. So I mean, in theory, if you're gonna let they take the risk of letting you get that big, you should get some of that stuff back.
Yes, that being said, it either is going to take a lot of manpower or better satellites than we have access to be able to see that. And so I think it's going to, I think we can get there. It's just going to take some increased technology. You have a question?
Yeah, what you said earlier, that the cover crops don't, just by themselves, don't really pay very much. So get carbon credits helps do that. But there's a poster over by the university personnel over there shows that if you're just doing cover crops, it costs somewhere between $20 and $50 an acre out of the farmer's pocket.
Mhm.
So we got to get that $50 or more back in order to do that.
Yes, for sure. Right now, a lot of these markets are marketing themselves as offsetting risk. They're reducing the risk, the financial risk of you putting that in for the first time, but no one's really priced right now to cover the whole price of cover crops. Right, I'm gonna go on a bit to talk about some recent funding that's come out from the government for these climate smart practices. So this time last year, a request for proposals was released from the USDA. And at that point, they were going to fund $1 billion worth of these projects. They got, and these were for folks working in the space to put proposals together, create a market for these climate smart commodities. They ended up funding $3.1 billion of these. So they really kind of shook the piggy bank out to find some money for that. And 15 of these projects are available in Illinois. I will mention that they're not all row crops. Some of them are specialty crops like trees and berries. Some of them are forestry and some are livestock projects, and they are all multi-state projects. It was about $844 million across all states included in those, and that gets down when you divide it out by the amount of money per state to be around $46 million. So there's about to be a lot of money floating around for this in Illinois. That being said, all the associations were asked to sign letters of support. There were some that were priced at $100 an acre. Those didn't really get funded. I think we're still going to be seeing a lot of 35, 40, hopefully up to $50 an acre projects through this. So the USDA also has, as part of the Farm Bill, they fund different programs for conservation, including the EQIP program, which you can enroll a field in, the CSP program, which you do need to enroll your whole farm in, and then they can work with different partners to put on these same programs. So the PCM program has an RCPP for cover cropping. Soil and Water Outcomes Fund is partially funded by an RCPP for cover cropping. So it was in the recent Inflation Reduction Act, it was announced that about a little over $19 billion will be put together across the country over 10 years for climate smart practices. So this added $8.45 billion to EQIP, $3.25 billion for CSP, $4.95 billion for RCPP, which I explained before, and about $1.4 million for the ASEP program, which is an easement that keeps agricultural land as agricultural land, and then $1 billion for technical assistance. This is a great announcement. This is going to, the USDA does pay pretty fair rates for a lot of these things. And so this is going to be a great opportunity. That being said, this is going to probably be negotiated in the 2023 Farm Bill. I know our policy team and Corn's policy team are probably working on this very hard to make sure that this still stays fair for row crop farmers. I think currently in Illinois for EQIP, there's about a $30 million wait list of people that apply for that, but aren't able to receive the funding. And so hopefully some of this is able to help out with that. So I've talked a lot about different programs you can stack, programs you can't stack, and I want to direct you to an awesome resource. These are all the programs as of this fall that were available in Illinois for cover cropping. The Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership worked pretty hard to put this together. If you go on the left-hand side for you and along the top, if there's a green check, you can stack that. If there's a red X, you can't. So there is some opportunity to stack some of these programs to get that payment up higher, but you really have to pay attention. I know some of the programs have had somebody accidentally double dip for a very small amount of money, and USDA did want to fix that, right? And so with the amount of programs coming out and with all the different opportunities, you could accidentally enroll in multiple programs, but that's why you really need to read the fine print and pay attention, so you don't have somebody knocking on your door to collect that money back from you. With that being said, that is what I have for you this afternoon. If you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them.